experience go like, yeah, this seems good.
Yeah. But we all know where this is going in the sense that we're going to get to 1985. And how did you two hear that Gary Gygax was out in October of 1985? Or when did you, and what was the feeling then?
Yeah, how did I
think they sent out a memo.
Yeah.
Well, that's very
and
personal of them.
And there was an extremely active, rumor mill within the company.
Oh my God, yeah.
So, yeah, it was probably either through a memo, and I don't remember whether there even was like a company-wide meeting there certainly was a meeting to say, this is the new, things are going to improve from here on.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
It's right, it's all going to be uphill from this point on.
Yeah. But yeah, frankly, all of this time, even up through like in 85 and 80, up through there, we were on what was going on.
Yeah, not a lot was shared outside the executive area.
I mean, had you met the woman who would go on to be the CEO of TSR, Lorraine Williams, before that? Because she was around.
She was in the office. She was in the office, and what little interactions we had with the upper management, she would be in the meetings and something like that. And but most of the time, the most interaction would be like with the VP of the kind of the creative side, and that would be it. Or
we certainly knew who she was. And,
And so Gary leaves, and before Gary left, he had already written in Dragon magazine about the possibility that that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons could someday see a second edition. In fact, in that Dragon article, he even suggests one day there might be a third edition. There could even be a fourth edition, maybe in distant decades to come. But as the chips fell at the end of this, you two ended up being tasked substantially with implementing the second edition of D&D. So tell us how that started. How do we get to the point where we're now taking another bite at the apple, taking the system that had been created, that had been so profoundly successful in the 80s, and we're going to try to do better?
I mean, I think that story really pretty much starts with Zeb with Oriental Adventures.
Yeah, so with Oriental Adventures, this is one of those cases where basically Gary had agreed to have some, I won't say crony, but somebody who had no experience, writing anything of this size or scope. I don't think they'd even had any game material published. I'm not sure. Maybe in France, because he was French, and it completely dropped the ball. And we had a strict Random House deadline, and so I wound up basically stepping in because I had been kind of helping and advising on our end a little bit on this, and so I wound up stepping in and taking it over. Very short deadline, a lot of work. We'll skip over all that, but that meant I was dealing like weekly with Gary to kind of go over, this is what this is what I've got, this is what we're planning, and until it got to the point where I had covered most all of that, and then it was just go right like mad. So I had spent a lot of time with him on that. He knew, and he did trust me. In fact, when he later set up Tri-G, he tried to hire me away.
Oh, really?
And except he would never tell me what it's going to do.
Yeah, did it ever become clear what it is that Tri-G did? I'm sorry, that may be too inside baseball for this conversation, but OA did create an opportunity for another look at the system, the fundamentals of it. So what would you say are kind of the innovations that you worked on in Oriental Adventures that then got imported into 2E?
Well, certainly the biggest innovation was the proficiency system. That was by far the thing that became a natural expansion when we went into second edition. And a lot of other things were actually fairly small. Most of it, a lot of it was just working out balance issues, getting conversations with Gary about he had always had a complaint that the combat system had one too many die rolls, and he would love to have removed those. That whatever that one is, he just couldn't figure out which one.
Helpful feedback from management, as always, right? Yeah.
But so a lot of it, the wasn't so much the rest were like great innovations, but that I could take material and create material that meshed well with what existed.
And so Oriental Adventures was, there were all these kind of interesting new, to some extent groundbreaking new systems for the game. But when you took Oriental Adventures and a book like Unearthed Arcana, which clearly they're canon within AD&D, but as we're going forward from there, it was always a problem because we couldn't assume that everyone had all those books and knew all those systems, how they worked. So everything we did from that point on, we were constantly juggling. How much of this do we include? How much of this do we depend on as fundamental?
And just for people here who aren't familiar with the chronology, I mean, we're talking about books that came out in 1985, like right before Gary was ousted. Unearthed Arcana was earlier in the year. Oriental Adventures was a bit later on, and although it had Gary's name on it, at least inside it didn't credit. Thanks to Zeb. I think he even pretty much says like Zeb wrote this book, man. Like my name is on this for marketing purposes so that people will buy it. But like so, yeah. Now that you've got that problem, obviously there's now disparate elements of system in 1E
Right.
AD&D, which is something that original OD&D had faced, like a decade earlier, where there were so many things spread out across Dragon articles and like different supplements and what actually constituted the game. So I can definitely see that as a big motivation for why.
And there are years worth of sage advice articles in the Dragon that are clarifying things throughout those books. And none of it is in the books, and none of it is indexed, and no one can find those answers. We can't even find those answers.
Right.
So yeah, that was a big motivation from my end, was that it would be great if we could revise all of this and just unify the game system, make it so that everything you need is in one place and is well organized and is clearly explained. Because the other big problem was how do we teach the game to new players? We want this to grow, but you can't learn the game from these books. They're not impenetrable, right? As I've said before, they're very entertaining to read, right? It's like sitting down and having a conversation with Gary. It's very conversational, but in terms of being a reference book at the table, it's almost useless.
It sounds a little harsh, maybe to say, but in some ways, there was a desire to kind of Gary-size the books because they were difficult for a lot of people. Yes, they were entertaining to read, but some people were entertaining to read was like, I need a dictionary and all this other stuff. And so part of the hope was that can we get something that is more readable so that it will reach, we weren't trying to reach, 10-year-olds or anything like that, but that at least, people wouldn't be constantly going like, I have no idea, this is too frustrating.
Right. Yeah. And that when a question comes up during the game, you can actually find the answer in a reasonable amount of time at the table.
That sounds nice. That sounds like a desirable design property for a system to have.
Yeah.
So when did the call come down? When did you get, okay, this is greenlit, we're doing it, and it's on you guys?
It's so hard to say because there was so much hemming and hawing at first.
Yes.
I mean, we started kind of making plans before anything was actually fully greenlit. Because
we were kind of in a mode of, we need to demonstrate that this is feasible to the executives. So because if it's left up to them, they will not pull the trigger.
And also it was, and when they do decide, then it will be too late because they won't give us enough time.
Right. Right.
So and this mostly fell to Steve to kind of figure out.
And so my first thought was, we approached this as a pure editing exercise. What can we accomplish if all we do is clean up the existing text? So, and again, I've told the story before, but at that time, it's important to remember that these books were all done in a pre-digital age. So there were no digital files, there were no word processing files that had the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook in them. It was all just, in fact, the best copies we had were what was printed. So I went over to the mail order hobby shop and I got a couple copies of each of the books, and I came back to my desk and I sliced them apart with razor blades, and then just started cutting sections apart and seeing how I could reorganize the book. And I worked on that for a few days, and that was enough to demonstrate that would not work. That there was no solution that grew out of that attempt. So the next thing was going through the books and creating a completely new outline of the DMG and the Player's Handbook. And one of the things that we wanted to do as well was that there were a lot of rules players needed to know in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and so they didn't really have access to them. So that our idea was everything the players need to know should be in the Player's Handbook, and things that only the DM needs to know should be in the DMG.
Little did we realize that made the DM's book kind of thin.
Yeah. Turns out the players need to know a lot. But yeah, so I sat, I don't know how long, it probably took about a week of sitting there just going through the two books and generating a completely new outline for them, a very detailed outline. As I've said, at the time we were using, our printers were dot matrix, tractor feed, continuous feed printers. And so when I printed out those two outlines, I took them and I taped them up on the wall, and it hung down the wall and out across the floor because there was so much detail there. But we had at that point, at least a good starting point that we could look at and say, if we do this, this is what our target is going to be.
And so kind of at the same time, I was having kind of more informal discussions with Ward, who was, basically he knew this needed to be done, but he too was still not fully sold on the we need to do this.
Yeah. And it's worth saying that the concerns that the executive board had were very valid, right? We had a big following, we had tons of fans, we had warehouses full of books that were all, original AD&D. And their fear was, as soon as we announced we're doing a new edition of the game, all the sales of everything we have is just going to come to a halt until the new edition shows up.
And so I was trying to figure out, because, we had not just the original first edition books, but we had Unearthed Arcana, Oriental Adventures, we had The Wilderness, we had all these other, these survival guides and all this stuff. And it's like, well, what out of this should we be considering core?
Right.
What did we need to start pulling together, and what were we going to move out and say, no, this is really not part of the core. And there were a lot of back and forth discussions about, like, do you include like everything that was in Unearthed Arcana, or what about some of these wonky systems? Psionics was a big debate.
Yeah.
Well, but tell me a bit about the community consultation process, or the way you engaged with the community on that. And I am trying in all these panels to tie these things back occasionally to Gen Con, because I know that you did some seminars here, and remember at the time, TSR owned Gen Con then, right? And so it was an instrument of TSR.
Yeah.
And so I know you did some seminars and things like that, where you came and talked to people about what your plans might be. But of course, you socialized this a lot in the Dragon, and things like that. You got feedback from that. There were surveys that went out in Polyhedron that people filled out. What was that process like of trying to tune this to what the community at least thought they want?
So a lot of it first started just in office, and then I remember we had big roundtable meetings with all the designers in the design department where we would go over, like, this is what we're talking about, and this is, by the way, which of these character classes, we had some debates about the character classes and what we do, and then I started working up the idea of all the specialty class, stuff.
I remember some very long and contentious meetings about renaming classes.
Oh yeah.
There were vicious
Rogue
arguments about
versus,
that.
yes.
Yeah. What do you call the cleric?
And so there was, it was just like all sorts of weird levels of minutia that would sometimes just get us like going in circles endlessly. But so once we kind of would get that to either, a presentation, and I won't say always a consensus, but at least this is what we're thinking about, get feedback, and then go from there. And then we did some very early seminars at Gen Con, because even then the rumor mill was going about it, and so we wanted to kind of try to get in front of it a little bit. And Gen Con really was our only real public exposure tool.
Yeah. Again, no social media, no Facebook, no Twitter. If you wanted to communicate with the fans, it had to be at a convention or through the magazine.
Yeah, and so we did a seminar where we talked about, in very broad terms, kind of what we were thinking in terms of, the why, the reason to do it, what were the goals, what did we want to achieve on a bigger scale, and just a little bit about kind of like some of the design choices that we were doing. And it was kind of mostly to say, we are looking at this and working on it, and acknowledge that, and also kind of as a bit of a PR kind of a thing to say, oh, look, and we're asking your opinion.
Well, and you asked some quite controversial questions to the community. I remember there's a Dragon article that was called "Who Dies?" Which of your babies are going to be killed when it comes to character classes going forward in the second edition of D&D? Yeah. And you might have gotten some, spirited responses to that in the community.
Yeah, well, that started because Jim Ward basically tasked me to write an article that he wanted to stir up some controversy. He wanted to once we knew what we're doing, once we were really kind of on the path of doing this, now it was like, okay, let's get people like, let's really get their awareness.
Let's get them talking about it.
Yeah, let's get them talking about it, right? And so we talked about, what to do, and okay, it was the question of, well, what are we doing with the character classes? This is the most fundamental core thing for the players, and so we put together that. I wrote the article, and he wanted me to be inflammatory.
And flames resulted.
and the big question is, do we use all the character classes? And I had some pretty strong opinions about not using some of them, and so used the article to present the arguments, and then stood back.
Quite a distance back. Yes. Fantastic. But ultimately, this did result in the production of a new player's handbook. I believe it actually had an apostrophe.
Yes.
Between
that was the debates about the apostrophe.
That was a big debate,
which was
too.
not true. First edition AD&D. That was the player's plural handbook, not the player's possessive handbook. A dungeon master's guide, same thing. Apostrophes added, and this thing called the Monstrous Compendium that you started with. Tell us a little bit about the Monstrous Compendium in particular as a strategy for Oh, yeah, I can see you're so embarrassed. Do you want me to tell the story instead? Is it so embarrassing?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the Monstrous Compendium, before they eventually completely recanted it into what AD and produced the Monstrous Manual that followed, it was a binder that shipped in a cardboard box.
Right.
And it was a 3-ring binder you could open up. And
big binder too.
Right. And so, and this was your, authoritative encyclopedia of all the monsters of second edition. And the notion was, hey, every time we've got some more monsters to add, rather than you having to buy a monster manual 2 or a Fiend Folio, just stick them in there. If you think about it for a second, though, especially listed alphabetically, there might be some things that could go wrong with that plan. Like, if you have like monsters that.
But those problems could not have been foreseen.
They could not have been foreseen by anyone at the time.
They could be overlooked.
But this also, and I guess it's a good segue, this takes us as well into the world building of second edition, and second edition's emphasis on what we would today call a multiverse that would surround D&D, because for each of those worlds, and Forgotten Realms debuted really just at the end of the 1E eras, when the first Forgotten Realms box set was shipped in 1987. But, as we get Ravenloft added, as we get Dark Sun added, as Alkadim, Planescape, each of those would have their own Monstrous Compendium addenda that you would then be able to like slip into this. But
Yes. See? That's a great idea.
it's a great idea. Why didn't it work? Oh, it's perfect.
I blame all of you.
Yeah, right. One guy in the audience loved it. So there you go. But yeah, tell me a little bit about the world building process from that.
So the world building stuff was, first off, we very deliberately within the second edition rule books did not go heavily into like creating a specific world for it.
Right. But and one thing we wanted to avoid was the problem that was one of the direct motivations for second edition, which was having multiple rule books, right? That you then had to carry and cross-reference all.
Like Oriental Adventures,
Right.
So-
We didn't want to immediately have another Unearthed Arcana or something like that.
So and the other part of it was we very deliberately restricted the core rules to kind of your generic Western European fantasy kind of stuff. So we knew there was a whole lot of stuff that went, but Forgotten Realms was really like our really first serious attempt at world building, because frankly we weren't allowed to touch the world of Greyhawk.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a whole. It was our first real experience at it.
Yeah.
And so that went on for quite a while. That survived quite a while where we didn't feel like we needed to generate new worlds, because there was a lot more, there was a lot of territory there to fill. But then eventually, once you've created one world, that itch shows up for other people. They want to create stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the common conception of this, and if it's a misconception, this would be a good time to let the world know for the sake of posterity, was that because Lorraine Williams came from, an IP background, right? She had managed the Buck Rogers intellectual property, that, when she looked at TSR, when it was in a dire situation in the mid-1980s, the bright spots were things like Dragonlance, right? That were taking off novels. There was transmedia strategies were beginning to develop, where this will simultaneously be a novel and a module and a calendar and whatever tchotchkes we can sell you, right? Like, to what degree do you think that her direction then got Jeff Grubb to go find Ed Greenwood and say, we're going to do the realms, right? Like,
well, I mean, absolutely. There's no denying that when you put out a product like Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance and it sells really well, that's a big motivator to people running the company to do more of that.
And even with Forgotten Realms, I mean, Dragonlance kind of took off and surprised everybody. It was like, what the hell? This is all, and the plan of modules and everything was barely kind of coordinated at first.
Right.
And then when we did Forgotten Realms, there really wasn't a plan for books or any other stuff for it. It was like, here, we're going to do this setting and we'll do modules for it. And then then it was like, oh yeah, there was I think Jeff really had to fight hard to get books, and Doug Niles, they both fought really because they wanted to write novels for it. And it took a fight to kind of convince people that, we can do books in this and expand the book line kind of.
And then the book module connection succeeded so well.
Yeah.
Do you remember that ridiculous marketing tape with Dana Carvey doing the...
No, I can't. I'm glad I.
Oh wait, there are some secrets that are not yet ready to be told to the world. But then it got into computer games as well with FR, right? Pool of Radiance, right?
Yeah.
Would be coming out at the same time as
and
the
that
Roots
was the first
Adventure
of the
and-
really kind of like, let's make an effort to link it and tie it all in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, suddenly we realized, hey, we can build a complete cross-market thing. And then we tried to do it for everything, and that maybe
Right.
didn't work so well.
Yeah, so we're going to start, and you didn't get to that. We're getting later in the conversation now. So
Right.
we did
The
try to
old,
do it for everything.
Hey, we
right?
have a horse. Let's beat it to death.
Let's beat it to death. So fast forward to 1994, and I guess right before we do this, we should acknowledge at least one setting that you were integral to developing that has had quite long legs. It's called Planescape.
Yes. That
A
was-
round of applause for Planescape. Planescape fans here. So all the rest of it maybe was too much, but not Planescape. I just want to make sure we're being clear about that on record here for posterity. But sure, by 1994, things had changed in the industry. There was this new card game out that was called Magic the Gathering that came out in 1993, and I don't know to what degree the two of you personally hold Magic responsible for what turned into a bit of a decline, right, in the tabletop D&D business.
I don't think I consider it responsible for the decline. I think it was a contributing, it contributed, and
Right.
not in any small way, but there were enough issues already that at that point.
Go on, please.
Yeah.
There
Well,
were other issues?
at that point, it just seemed that role playing was in kind of a general decline.
Right.
And
I mean, you had a kind of a double whammy of Magic and Vampire the Masquerade was kind of reshaping the RPG market at that time.
Yeah, it was changing the market. It was changing the who was entering into the market and kind of what they were looking for. And we had accumulated well before that even a reputation for kind of safe but stodgy material.
And as an example of the safety, we might mention the extirpation of demons and devils early on in the technical process. And there are some, though, I understand. So who are a fan of the Batsu and the
Abzu and the Tanari. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually,
Any fans out there?
I prefer those names because I think they're more flavorful.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, hey, I've been wrong before, and I'm sure I'll be wrong again.
And the plan had always been, well, we give them kind of their own individualized names, and then we put a few of them into the Monstrous Compendium thing. But with that, we'll do a follow-up thing that will then introduce like the full line, because the moms who complain, they don't look at that stuff. They only look at like the big three kind of items and stuff.
Right.
And so let's just move that target a little bit out of range.
Yeah. So yeah, we couldn't use the words demon and devil, and the art. They could not have pointy tails.
Yeah.
That,
All right, we're really getting down to it here. So I've got a couple more questions I need to do before you guys are off the hook and we can get the third edition people up here to tell their side of this story. But when did it first become clear to you that there was a very serious problem at TSR and that something was going to have to change dramatically?
I can't answer honestly because I left in '94.
Okay, so you missed it.
But I left in part because things did not seem to be, in some ways, things were just not moving forward.
Yeah.
There were the opportunities didn't seem to be there as much anymore, and I got a call from a friend in computer business who basically was going to pay me more money, and it was like an easy decision.
So, but you rode through.
Yeah, and it was. There had been such difficult times in the past that the company had weathered and come through that, when things got rocky, there was kind of a feeling of, well, we've been through this before, we'll get through it again. I think the point where it became clear that maybe we wouldn't was everything that happened around Dragon Dice, right? When we came out with Dragon Dice and it was an enormous hit, and then we found out that a ton more Dragon Dice had been ordered,
yes.
and they were still on their way across the Pacific when the bottom just fell out of that market, and suddenly we realized, you know what? Everybody has as many Dragon Dice as they want, and we have shiploads of them on their way. So Yeah, that was a bit of a reality check there, that there didn't seem to be a very good way around. And
And even that, well, you could see that symptom earlier on. We would do modules, and they would print like, 70,000 of them, and we'd sell 20,000.
Yeah.
And then they sat in the warehouse, and then they would, next time we do a module, they were like, okay, we'll only order 50,000, and they still sat in the warehouse.
yeah.
So when do you recall first hearing that it might be that company, that upstart company that made that Magic the Gathering card that all the kids were into, that might actually end up acquiring TSR?
Boy, that was such a surreal time to begin with. I mean, the company, we really weren't doing anything. That's not true. We were doing a lot of things, but we weren't publishing much of anything anymore.
Right. Dragon had stopped printing at this point, right?
Yeah, I believe so. But everybody was coming into work, and we were trying to be productive as much as we could. And there was we were having a lot of brainstorming sessions on, what could be done in the future if the company gets back on its feet. A lot of brainstorming about a potential third edition. There was a certain amount of, we tied our computers together, and we spent a certain amount of every day playing Doom on the network.
Very inspirational, and also, apropos, even a bit on the nose for the situation of the company at the time to be playing Doom.
Yeah, but when I could not say that I remember the exact time that I heard that that there might have been an offer on the table from Wizards of the Coast, but the rumor mill at TSR was always really active, and I'm sure that I heard it unofficially before I heard anything officially.
Even kind of right before I left and outside, you would hear rumors like, "Oh, Random House was going to be."
There was always
somebody somewhere that was out there. It seemed like,
and nobody wanted the company to be sold to Random House. That's for sure.
Yeah, I can believe that. Well, I think we're probably going to wrap up with this, but I wanted to give both of you an opportunity if there's anything you're working on now, because you've both gone on to do some amazing stuff. You did a ton of great work early in 5e and have continued to pitch in here and there, and you've been doing great stuff in the computer games industry. Anything more you want to talk about how has life after TSR been for you?
So for me, life after TSR, I went off to computer games and did stuff. Wound up eventually working on Elder Scrolls Online for a very long time. And the really interesting part about life after TSR is that TSR, you didn't realize it at the time, but TSR was this training ground for so many writers and fantasy designers especially, and to the point where when we hired people to be, especially writers and some of the content designers, it was an asset to say, oh, yeah, this person worked at TSR. We've gotten several of our top writers now. I mean, Jeff Grubb's working there, Bill Slavisek's working there, Ed Stark, and a lot of it had to do with they all know how to deal with shared worlds, which is a complicated problem.
Yeah.
But me, I'm now retired, and so I just wait until I get bored and then I write something.
And you still show up for things like this and even run second edition. So thank you for your service, Deb. Steve?
I'm actually retired now too, as of the end of February. Although the way
Quasi-retired.
Yeah, the way I look at retirement is I'll keep working on projects that interest me, but I will no longer answer to anyone else's deadlines.
How do I get that gig, by the way?
Yeah.
Because
then that's been very nice. And I have a big file folder full of project ideas that I was never able to get any other publishers interested in.
He's also got a file folder open of things that he started and never finished.
That's right. Yeah. But I know they're solid gold.
That's right. Well, historians looking at this years from now will prove you right on that, I'm sure, Steve.
Yeah.
But please, everyone, give a big round of applause to David Zeb Cook, Stephen Winter, 2nd edition D&D. With that, I know we got to clear the room because we've got another panel right after this with 3rd edition people. Wow. We will talk to them in just 10 minutes, I think. Thanks for coming.
Right.
If you guys have any time and want to meet with people and outside here and talk to them, or if you have places to be.
I've got time. I'll be outside.
Yeah, please. Feel
All right.
free to hold court. People might want you to sign some things.
All right.
Do whatever.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you, Peter.
Yeah.